Hi, this is Jim from RV4x40.com.
And I'm Chris. Welcome to our home today.
We're glad you could join us. We're going to cover a topic which may be of interest to some of you. We hope it is. And as you know, we've traded RVs. We actually did that back in November. And we thought we would do a video on that process, maybe give you some information about how that worked and what we did right and a couple of things we did wrong. And maybe that can keep you from making the same mistake.
Yes, it was a big decision as we were looking at what our old home, our old RV, was providing us, and as it was starting to have some difficulties, we decided it was time to change.
I've alluded to it, I think, in some other videos, maybe talked about it, but in January of 2019, we were getting ready to move the RV and start kind of our spring travels that year. When I was getting the RV ready to move, I noticed that the slide, it's the one we're sitting in now, in effect, on the other coach, but that's the largest slide in that coach. It's the heaviest one. It has a refrigerator in it. And I noticed that the track at the bottom of the slide had started to dig into a trim piece underneath of it. And it was clearly an interference that shouldn't be there. It was only on the back side of the slide towards where the refrigerator was. And so that was something which clearly needed to be fixed. Prior to that, we had had some situations where the slide seemed to not go in and out as well as it should, and occasionally would make some noises, and those noises actually got more serious in the course of 2019 as it went along. We were going to go to Florida beginning of that particular year, 2019. So we set up to go to a major RV dealer. They claim to be the largest RV dealer in the world, and they may well be. They also have a huge service organization. I think there's over 100 service bays. And so we set up an appointment to go in and have them look at it. And we allowed about a week or so in our schedule to be able to do that. And then we had other things we wanted to do, family wanted to see, and a commitment to be someplace in, I think, March of that year. So we had plenty of time when we got there. The problem started occurring there because, without going into all the details, we found out that a lot of people were having trouble with that location. If it wasn't a simple problem, then it seemed to take forever to get parts and get work done. And so we had been there a week. They had claimed they knew what was wrong with it, ordered the parts. The parts came in, they were wrong. And at that point, they couldn't even tell us when the parts would be ordered, let alone be in. And so we left there without getting the slide fixed, thinking, well, there's a shop we use up in Elkhart. We were going to Indiana. And the gentleman that's the service manager there was an ex-Monaco employee and worked for them for 25 years on the factory floor and in their R&D engineering department to help design these things. So very competent individual, has a reputation as probably one of the best of the older Monaco service shops in the country. We took it there, spent a lot of time with him, actually half a day, and his conclusion was he had no idea what was wrong. It shouldn't do what it was doing, but it did. And he ruled out some things that I thought might be the problem. His advice was to go to the factory service center and let them diagnose it. They could tell what was wrong. We were going to do that, but it was July before we could get into the factory service center in Decatur. And a note here is that Monaco had been going out of business twice since our coach had been made, and the current owner of the brand was a company called RVIA Group, and they owned several other brands of RVs as well. So before we got there, we found we could go to yet another RV service shop in Chicago, and we were in Indiana. So we drove about 250 miles after a phone conversation with their service advisor, who assured me they could fix the slide. We got there, got it pulled into the bay, and about 11 o'clock in the morning they called us and said they really couldn't fix our slide because they didn't have the equipment to work on it. After having driven 250 miles and a bunch of Chicago tolls, we were kind of upset about that, but we left and went back to Indiana. From there, we went to one more dealership somewhere, and they had the similar story, couldn't tell what it was. The factory had no idea what it was. So during this process, through about from January to August of 2019, we had conversations back and forth about the need to sell the motorhome.
Yes, and we really were fearful that we were going to really get hung up somewhere with this slide, that we'd be parked somewhere, maybe far from our home stations, and not be able to get the slide in or not be able to get it out would not be as severe because we could travel then, but getting it in is a different problem. So we decided it was time to make some changes.
Right. We had considered this back and forth, but also did not like the financial hit. Our intent in buying the motorhome we bought was it would service us. It's a Cummins engine and an Allison transmission, which are good probably for 500,000 miles, and we wouldn't put anywhere near that mileage on the coach before we were too old to do this anymore. So it wasn't in our game plan. We going back and forth, but then somewhere in I think September we were in a campground which wasn't particularly level. It wasn't all that bad, and the windshield cracked when we tried to level the RV. And this would have been the fourth windshield when it got replaced in the 4 years we'd owned the motorhome. And there's a design issue with that particular series of coaches that one of the first times they used one of these super huge oversized windshields, and they had done a poor job of engineering how it fit into the chassis, and so there could be stress on the windshield when it was being leveled, and it cracked, and that happened twice with the windshield. The third time it broke was something flew off a tractor trailer going the other way and actually impacted the windshield and broke it. So at that point I just decided that I did not want to continue to pay the deductible on replacing windshields, and it was time to go look for something newer, something that was kind of not an orphan, which the Monaco was since the company was long gone. And honestly, the factory service center knew less about the coach than I did, so that wasn't good. So we started looking around at 2 or 3 brands that we considered would be useful, and I was doing some looking online, RV trader, places like that, and trying to find a place we could do this. One of the issues was, since we're full time now, and we weren't when we bought the original coach, we were still living in our sticks and bricks home, and so we had plenty of time. We weren't in a hurry, but now we're living in it full time, and that's not conducive to doing a private deal, because you can't trade it in. Nobody's just selling a coach is probably going to want to take your coach as a trade-in. So we were restricted to finding a dealer that had something we wanted in the price range we wanted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we were on our way back to Georgetown, and we were stopped in the Dallas area, and I found online a couple of different places, actually 3 different places, that had coaches that fit the description of what we wanted. And one of the things we had done just as a matter of course in getting the first motor coach was we had sat down and made a complete list of everything that we wanted in the motorhome we were going to get, thinking it was going to be the last one we would buy. And we had the list divided up into, these are the things that we really, really, really want to have, almost essentials. And then there were the things that'd be nice to have. And when we found the first coach, we did a good job, I think, on that process. Finding the floor plan is probably the most important thing, is in terms of things that are the hardest to change. You can always change decor, change furniture, even paint the thing if you want to. So you can do some redecorating, but the floor plan is pretty well stuck once you get into it. So we had some experience with that list, and it was still active and still accurate, and pretty much had confirmed with having the other coach for 4 years that we knew what we wanted. So we started around the Dallas area to go find things we could look at and perhaps make a deal on while we were there. And interestingly enough, the first one we went to, you can tell the story.
Well, we were about a mile from the dealership, and we knew exactly which one we wanted to look at. We had called ahead and made arrangements, and so we're about a mile from there, and we get a phone call that it has sold, and we are so close we just go on and go anyway. But that was obviously not to be then. We did real quickly look at it. It was still there, but it was not something we were going to be able to get. So we moved on, and we went to another dealership, which ended up not having really anything that interested us. And then Jim found one that we did end up having some interest in.
Well, this was an interesting way, because the first one I had talked to the dealer the day before, and it was still there and still available. So from the time I talked to him in the afternoon until the next morning, someone from out of town had actually called up and bought the thing sight unseen. So that's how that transpired. So at this point, we were debated about even making the drive down, but there's a large motorhome dealership in Alvarado, Texas, which is south of Fort Worth on I-35W, and it's motorhome specialists. They bill themselves as the largest motorhome dealer in the world, and I have no reason to doubt that. They have a huge inventory of new and used machines, and so it was a good place to go. We'd actually stopped there before looking at motorhomes, so it was not an unknown quantity to us. One of the good things about that dealership is it's fairly low key in terms of getting you into something. If you walk in the front door and they'll ask you if you want a salesman or not, and if you say no, you're perfectly welcome to take one of their golf carts, and it's a huge lot, and use the golf cart to go all over the lot and look at whatever you want to look at. And if you find something, come back and talk to them more. If not, you can just leave and nothing is lost. In our case, I had found the one, and it actually had just come in. They didn't even have pictures of it on their website yet. And so we said, well, we might as well have a salesman. We know which one we want to look at, and that's not the only thing we would consider, but it's the one we want to look at first. And so we did, and it's the one we ended up buying, and saw it. It had not been cleaned up. They said they just had brought it in, so there had been nothing done inside or outside. There was a cosmetic issue. One of the right rear fenders had been scraped and broken, so there was some fiberglass work needed to be done, obviously, before it was going to be something we'd want. We didn't have to have it done, I guess, but we wanted to have that done. And so we sat there and went through it. It had the elements of the floor plan we wanted. It had everything that we liked. A couple of things in retrospect, at least one thing in retrospect that we would have been concerned about. And I did a video about that, and that's the instant on hot water heater. You can go check at that. I'll put a link up in the top to that one if you want to see our problems with that particular water heater. And in retrospect, I would rather it didn't have that, but it's something also in retrospect I don't think we would have not bought this one because of the water heater. So something to be dealt with in the future in more detail. So we sat down with them and haggled over the price and the trade-in and all that kind of stuff, and got it all done. And so we gave them a deposit and considered the deal closed, and we still had to do paperwork and all that kind of stuff. So we headed back down with our existing coach to Georgetown and started looking at preparing it to get out of it. I had done a lot of work in that coach in terms of installing ham radio gear, a lot of wiring for that, and our data system, which is a cellular data modem, as well as a cell phone booster. All that was installed and tucked out of the way in that coach. So that had to all be removed, as well as some other things that we had in terms of personal effects. And of course, being full-time, it was going to be a matter of driving one coach beside the other one, and it turned out it took us about 2.5 days just to move all this stuff when we did it.
Yes, it was a longer process than we really thought it was going to be, and between the arranging the financing, which went pretty well, and being able to know that it was ready for us to move in, that they had done all the inspecting and everything that was needed to be done. So it was much longer than we had anticipated.
Yeah, this was where the thing kind of goes. There's some good points and some bad points about dealing with this particular dealership. And overall it came out okay, but there were some bumps along the way. Been tracking through the salesman, who did a good job of keeping me informed of what was going on. But it had to go into the body shop, get the repair work done, and he'd send me pictures every day or two of what was going on, and I could watch that, and they painted it, and we looked at it. Actually, they did an excellent job. Maybe if you're an expert, you could tell where it had been repainted, but as an amateur, and I can't tell where they actually worked on it. They did a really good job on that, so that was a good thing. But it obviously delayed us being able to get to the coach, because we wanted to have that done and have them do it before we owned it, and because we weren't going to be able to be in it as full-timers while I was in the body shop, so we wanted to get that out of the way. So that was all done, and then I was anxious and figured we would pretty quickly get up there to pick it up, but oh no, we still have to go through it and inspect it and verify everything else is working that you would expect to work, and clean it up and all this stuff. And so, okay. And that process, I think the whole thing was almost 3 weeks, maybe a little over 3 weeks from the time we signed the paperwork until they had it ready to deliver. It was longer than I thought it would be, but okay, they've gone through everything. So we get there on a Monday morning. It was actually Armistice Day, November the 11th, when we got there. And background here is we have a daughter in Indiana as well as a daughter and her family in Texas. So being in Texas, we get to be with the one family, and then we're going up to Indiana, and we had planned on going to Indiana for Thanksgiving, which obviously is in the fourth Thursday of November. And our other daughter and her family were coming up to be there as well. So it was a big family event. And normally our schedule is very flexible. We go where we want, when we want, stay longer or move sooner or whatever. But now we have a kind of a family deadline. We need to be there at a planned time for that. So time is getting a little bit short. But figuring that they're going to have everything done, we're okay. So we go to look at the coach, and driving up to it in a golf cart, first thing I see is that the generator slide is pulled out, the generator's out, and there are 2 legs and 2 feet sticking out from under the front of the coach. So this is not a good sign, because he's right in by the door. And so we are able to get in the coach. The steps were down and we could do that. And they actually had him blocked with a piece of wood, which was strange. But the guy was actually working on the steps for part of what they were doing. So we go inside, and there's a full-page checklist of things that they have gone over, which was impressive. And someone had gone through all these items, checked them off that everything is working, and signed off on it. And so I thought, well, this is pretty cool, and that was good. There was also a new state inspection report there, which becomes important. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But that was there, so we had some documentation about that everything safety-wise on the coach had been checked for the state standards. So we go through and we start looking at it, and we go through and get most of the paperwork done and all that kind of stuff while they're working on it. And the explanation is there are 2 things that are not working right. One of which is the cover over the steps, which is there for the passenger to put their feet on when you're driving down the road, because there's a step well in front of the passenger seat. And the second thing is the outside step was not going in and out correctly. So, okay, they are working on that. They had already diagnosed the step cover as needing a new motor. And so, okay, you can order the motor. It's a Lippert part. They'll have the motors. If you air freight it out, you can get them in 2 or 3 days from Indiana. So it shouldn't be a big deal. But it turned out to be a big deal later on. So they're not getting the step fixed. This was Monday. We start going through and checking things ourselves just to make sure. And everything so far is working out fine. Except a couple of things start to show up now. One of which is the hot water heater doesn't work real well. The second thing of which is I'm seeing a water drip underneath the right rear, or the driver's side rear of the coach, which I can't explain. So I'm trying to figure that out. At first, well, back up a little bit. For one thing, we'd had frost a couple of nights, and so I'm thinking that there was frost on the inside, and that was just drip off of it. So they're also still trying to get the step fixed. So by Tuesday evening, they've had about 3 techs now working on that step, and there's a guy that's been there. And he gets it all done, and the step goes in and out. The problem is it doesn't go in and out right. Those steps are supposed to stay out. If you want them to stay out, there's a switch you can turn it on that says, when I open the door, open the steps, but don't pull the steps in when I close the door. That's not working right. The steps are going in and out every time you open and close the door. Now, perhaps if you're not full-time, that wouldn't be a big issue. But the tech says, oh, that's no problem. You won't mind that. I said, well, I'm not so sure about that. Let me think about that one. So we figure out that that's what's going on, and that's not acceptable because that's a lot of extra wear, and the step mechanisms are not the most robust in the first place. So that's not something I'm going to live with. So on Wednesday, we still have a hot water heater problem. It's not heating the water right. And by now on Wednesday, we've been there 3 days. Everything should have been done before we got there. I would really have preferred it when, as soon as they had a problem that they couldn't fix and have everything done, that they simply called us up and delayed it, rather than have us come up and sit there. Now, we weren't paying for camping at that point. We're in their parking lot, actually parked beside the new one, and we were sleeping, I think, in the new one at that point and going back and forth. But it would have saved us time and definitely grief and aggravation if they had simply delayed it a little bit longer and done their job. So what's happening is we're not getting work done. And so the salesman had been by a couple of times, 3 times, whatever, during the week, and assured me, if things aren't going right, let me know. I'll help take care of it. So Wednesday afternoon, I called him up and says, okay, I am now officially annoyed because we're, things are not fixed, and there's nobody here working on it, and doesn't seem to be anybody doing any activity, and nobody's telling us why there's nothing going on. Are they waiting for parts? What about the motor they were going to order? Has it been ordered? When's it coming in? So forth and so on. So he understood it, and later on Wednesday afternoon, there was happened to be a woman who was in charge of all of the detail work and preparation work to deliver a new unit to a customer. Well, deliver a unit to a customer. Ours wasn't new, but deliver a unit to the customer and make sure everything is kind of in a make-ready situation. So she was the one responsible for getting text to us, and interesting conversation with her, because she did apologize we hadn't had more people there, and she said she would make sure we had good text there on Thursday morning. She also made the comment that she was frustrated because every time she found a good tech and hired him, then the foreman who ran the actual service department would steal that tech, so he would go work on revenue-producing repair jobs instead of just jobs of completing a contract that they assigned to deliver units. So that just tells you, I think, in spades about some of the issues that are there. Now, in their defense, I do know for a fact that competent, qualified RV technicians are rare. There are not enough of them in the industry to serve as a coach, and I don't know the number is accurate, but someone who follows that and actually has a repair shop has told me that there are only one qualified technician, a certified technician, for every 800 RVs in the country. So with the number of problems these things have, one tech can't keep up with 800 RVs in the course of a year. It just isn't going to happen. So there is a need for those qualified trained technicians in the marketplace. And what Motorhome Specialist is doing is having people who really are not qualified at what they're doing the work, because that may be all that they can find, and they do something. But their real problem is that the analytic skills and the diagnostic skills aren't there. The workmanship skills may be there, but in my observation of 3 of these different technicians, they really are just grasping at straws when it comes to working on the coaches. And so that's kind of a major problem. And given that we're at 3 other service locations with a problem that none of them could fix, it's not unique to Motorhome Specialists, but it's something to be aware of, that you really, really need to allow more than enough time. If you're going to buy a motorhome, new or used, you're going to have issues. So that's something to take into account. Now, because I've got a lot of experience in engineering background, I feel comfortable in doing the inspections myself. And I've got a lot of experience. We've had RVs for, 40 years or something like that, off and on. So I'm pretty qualified to take care of that. If you're not, there is an organization called RVIA, Recreation Vehicle Industry Association, and they certify inspectors. That's their business, their job is to look at RVs that are being bought or sold, whatever, but do a thorough inspection, and they can go through, they will test everything. They have detailed checklists that are multiple pages long, and they know how to exercise all of the systems in the RV. Now, one comment on that, one caveat: if you're buying a motorized unit, my understanding is the RVIA certification does not cover the chassis, powertrain, all that kind of stuff. So you may need to also get a mechanic, either a gasoline engine mechanic or a diesel mechanic, to help go over the rest of the coach before you buy it.
So with all these repair folks coming in and out, and the supervisors and our salesperson, I have to say that everyone was courteous and considerate of what was going on. Once they realized that there was a concern, they did eventually get to it. There was a few issues that were very minor, such as one of the gas stove burners not working, and they fixed that right away. And but the main thing is they were very, very helpful, as they could be.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that at all. I would agree with Chris that they were polite, they were courteous. In some cases, they seemed to know quite well what they were doing. One of the things we found, it was related to the water heater not working, which I mentioned, and there were potentially 2 problems with that. And I was, at this point, I started calling the manufacturer of the precision temperature, manufacturer of the water heater, and they have an excellent guy, 1 or 2 anyway. The one I worked with was excellent about giving me tips and telling me how it worked. And so I was able to determine that, first of all, there was an issue with the gas pressure in the entire motor coach. And so that was something that the checklist from motorhome specialist had not found, and I'm not sure I would have found it either if the water heater had worked. So the end result was that they, without any question, once we showed them what was going on, they agreed and they swapped out the pressure regulator for the propane. So that was a good thing. The other thing that happened was when we found the water leak, and I pointed it out to them, they had two guys come in because it was a two-man job because this coach has a washer and a dryer, and the leak was behind the washer. They pulled it out, and this is becomes an example of what can happen when a coach is built. Why this had never been found or fixed is beyond me because it's a 2014 model year, so it had been leaking for a long time back in the bathroom. There's a bath and a half in this floor plan. And so they pulled the washer out. They had to pull the dryer out to get the washer out and got in behind it. And they found a joint in the drain, which from the factory had never had any adhesive put in the joint to glue it together. So it was just a slip fit. Not intentionally, it just was slipped together. And so there was a potential there for any kind of flow in the wastewater system was going to leak. The really good news in that is that this particular joint was under the floor. The subfloors in almost all these coaches, ones I'm familiar with anyway, are built out of what's called OSB or oriented strand board, and it is not water friendly. If you get a leak in one of these things in the floor or any place this material is used, it basically turns to goo because the adhesive dissolves in water. And if that leak had been above the floor, there would have been a major problem with tearing out cabinets and getting to the floor to replace part of it. But it was underneath, so it was all plastic and aluminum where it was leaking on and then dripping down. So they, did a lot of work. It was probably 2/3 of a day for the one guy was there that whole time, and the second guy was there to help move things in and out. And so it was a long process, and they did take care of that. Now, the real bad news in this whole thing is because of all the work that was going on, we never actually drove the coach before we drove off the lot. And one of my 2020 hindsights, that was a mistake. But the bigger problem was we needed to get out of here. We'd allowed the whole week thinking that was plenty, and we really, maybe even we should have realized when we got here and it wasn't ready, we should have turned around and said, call us when you're done. But some of these things would have still been there and needed to be done. But if we'd have come back after Thanksgiving, we would have had like 3 or 4 weeks until Christmas. We could have stayed here and gotten more of these things taken care of. So after we left, there were some other minor things that came up that were just overlooked, and we didn't find them, and they were easy enough to take care of. And so it was not a big deal there. There's 3 things that became big deals. One of which they took care of and paid for. And that was the fact that the right front tire had been replaced, and that was obvious. The other tires were all Michelin's. This was another brand, and I forget what, but it was not the same brand of tire. However, when I started looking at it, it was not the right load range. It was not rated to take the weight that the front axle was rated for, so it was a mismatch not only of the type of tire and the tread, it was also a mismatch in load carrying capacity. So that was a safety violation, and point of fact is it failed, or should have failed, the safety inspection, because the safety inspector should have checked the tires that were on it, not only for tread wear, but particularly in a vehicle like this, for the load rating of the tires. And so they agreed that that was a problem that they were responsible for, and they agreed to reimburse me for the cost of replacing the tire. And I actually replaced both front tires because I wanted them to match. And they're getting to the point the rear tires are going to need to be replaced at some point before too long too, just because of age. But it wasn't quite at that point yet, and the tires were still in good shape. So I did replace both front tires. So in effect, not having the right tire cost me the cost of another tire. And these were, they're expensive tires on these things. But to their benefit, I sent them the invoice, and they sent me a check to reimburse me for the full cost of that tire. So that's a plus for them. 2 other issues that have come up, one of which was as soon as we drove it, it was obvious that the exhaust brake didn't work. And I spent actually a fair amount of time fussing around with that, trying to find out what it was. And I checked everything that I could check, and without taking it to a dealer, tried reading the service diagnostic codes, et cetera, and couldn't come up to grips with that one. Eventually took it to a Freightliner dealer in San Antonio, And the problem was that someone had programmed the engine computer to not allow the exhaust brake to engage. And the service manager there has been working on these things for 20 plus years, said he had never in his entire life seen or heard of anyone doing that to the computer, but someone did it to this one for whatever reason. The other problem we didn't find until we had a rainstorm and blowing wind with the rain. The unit had slide toppers on it, so when the wind blew the rain under the slide topper, we had a leak that showed up. And because of the difficulty getting to it under the slide topper, I paid someone else to come in. And normally a leak like that is easy to fix, but getting to it is not as easy with the slide topper. So I paid someone for that. So altogether, we were out, I think, about $400 of extra stuff that. And I talked to the salesman back and forth about reimbursement for that, and basically it was told, nah, you signed a statement saying it's that is once you leave the lot. If you'd have found it when you were here, it would have been different, but since it occurred after you left, we're not going to be responsible for it. So honestly, with everything else we've been through this year, with trying to get rid of the other coach and getting out of it, and then needing to get this one set up and other things like that, we just haven't worried about it, and we're moving on. And you know, we like the coach. The experience there was mixed, but
So some people wonder, well, moving all the belongings from one house basically into another can be challenging, and it is, even though it's an RV. We had purchased just a couple big laundry tubs and put as much as we can in each trip into a laundry tub and brought it over, put it away, went back for another load. Jim worked on many of the outdoor things because every little detail has to be moved and found a home for. And one RV and the pattern or how we kept things does not just transfer to the next RV. So it's a challenge and one that we just pretty much were able to get things put away the way we wanted it. For more of a temporary situation, and made some refinements as we went on.
yeah, that was you know, probably 2 solid days just of moving stuff. And you know, while we were there, we were mostly working on figuring out what to do and moving stuff around. And I'd say that overall, this coach has as much, if not more, storage space, generally speaking. The exception is the bedroom and clothes area. I think it's actually a little bit less in this machine. Between 2013 and 2014, they decided to put in a huge, humongous TV set, same size as the one on the front in the living area. And to do that, they took out some space in the wardrobe area and reduced the number and size of the drawers that are available. So that took some adjusting to get used to, and probably the worst place in terms of storage was there. Underneath, I actually have more storage. There's definitely more volume available in this floor plan than there was underneath. One of the things which was interesting, I think both of us psychology-wise, things got moved, in some cases from one side to the other, particularly in the kitchen area, because the way the cabinets were, they were almost reversed. And so for the first several months, I know I would start to go to the wrong side to get something out, because my muscle memory, my mental memory of where things were, it was on the driver's side, and no, it got moved to the passenger side, or it was on the passenger side and now it's on the driver's side. So that took some getting used to, but I think we're pretty much past that now. I tend to know where things are and tend to know where to go to get things.
Mm-hmm. So we are enjoying our new home, and we hope that us sharing some of our experiences may be of some help to you if you are in a situation of needing to either buy a motorhome or change to another motorhome. We hope this will be of some help.
We're trying just to kind of lay it out where we did some things right in this transfer, and we did some things that, again, hindsight, you can always go back and do it better. And we hope that by looking at that, and if you're considering either buying a new one, it's not quite as complicated if you're not full-time or not trying to transfer from one full-time unit to another. But some of these things would be applicable to buying a new motorhome, buying a used motorhome, whatever you want to do. I would still go back and emphasize that in our experience, the most important thing is actually the floor plan. To spend a lot of time figuring out what you need, what you have to have, and what you can like to have, and what you can live without, and what fits your mode of operation, your mode of living better. In our case, we've had 4 motorhomes now and 1 trailer. and that ratio tells you that, at least for me, I far prefer the motorhome. And obviously that's not what everyone does. An awful lot of people, and we see an awful lot of travel trailers and fifth wheels and everything else, conversion buses, or you name it. So it's not one size fits all. It's not what's good for us is necessarily good for you. It happens to be the way that we like to do it, and it works well for us. And I'm sure for someone that has a fifth wheel they're happy with, or a travel trailer they're happy with, they would say the same thing. So take your time. That's the biggest thing I would tell folks is especially if you're buying, actually if you're buying a new one or a used one, because we've only bought one of those new, and it had its own issues as we got it away from the dealership. And the stories you hear from talking to people and listening to them on YouTube, everyone seems to have a story if they've bought one new about the problems they've had with warranty work and those things. So that's something to consider. But also if you buy one that's used, someone else may have gone through those initial problems, but you may also find something like the drain we found that had never been sealed at the factory and was going to be a problem until someone spent the time to take it apart and deal with that particular issue. So we still love it. We're glad you came by today. We hope that some of this will be useful to you and in your search of how to get the perfect RV for you, no matter what it is. And so if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, we'd appreciate it if you'd click on the subscribe button down below and do that. And come back next week. We'll have another video. In the meantime, as we travel the highways and byways of America, have a good time.